Hey, we're live. All right. So have this out. I'm going to look at it in just a second. And tomorrow, make sure you have that Paris peace talks and the ratification battle read. That's in that thing. And so I went through the new, read it, and you have to know the material because, so underline things, you might have to jot down a few notes on your own, because the ratification battle is going to be the topic of the DBQ. And so I will give you a few things, but there's more additional material. You have the three groups that decided it, the reservationists, the irreconcilables, and the loyal Democrats. There are going to be 3 votes. Remember, it requires 2/3. Got to know a little bit about the treaty. Oh, one thing about this. When you read this, Article 10, that is the key issue. Article 10 of the treaty. It's about the League of Nations. You'll see it. I emphasize it. Article 10. All right, we got the genocide. That's just a weird thing. But we got the Armenian genocide. Who committed it? What country? Yeah, the Ottoman Empire. And it's all part of total war. Oh, total war. That whole idea of you can't have dissent because it's helping the enemy. What does every country in total war do in some way? They ban what? Free speech. And what was the United States law that banned free speech? Yeah. And what law still on the books? Oh, what kind of horrific dictatorship would come out of total war? Yeah. And they get a state of total war. Hey, we have the laws already for our next totalitarian dictator. The future is bright. It's actually kind of scary how many ways you can do this. Oh, so new rules of war. I went through that, and it's really important. I don't need to cover that again. Then we get to World War II and the other wars. Because poison gas is not so much the gas itself. It's using these unbelievable weapons and allowing it for civilians. And what kind of blockade was it? Starvation. Yeah, starvation. And the Germans used what weapon to try to blockade Britain? Yeah. What do they call them? U-boats. And what's the term for sinking without warning? Unrestricted submarine warfare. Don't have, they always got to give it a longer name. And the Germans began bombing civilians by air. What was the weapon? And then what was the Allied plan? To use bombers, but then to use what weapon to drop on cities here? Gas. What was the most, wasn't the most horrific, but the most effective gas? Yeah, heavier than air. All right, good. So we got genocide. Remember, this is the idea of the enemy within, all under the logic of total war. And so in 1941, at the end of 41, when it was clear that the Nazi Germany, the German offensive in the Soviet Union was going to fail. It was not going to work. They were not going to knock the Soviet Union out of the war in 6 weeks, right? They thought. And all of a sudden, they now have territory with massive, the largest population of Jews in the world. And they weren't going to win the war the way they thought. And they're going to occupy this area in total war. So it wasn't in Germany. It was in areas that they occupied, brutally occupied. That is when they began the final solution. Technically, 42 is when they say it, but actually it's the end of 41 as a measure of total war. Not in Germany per se. It was in the areas they occupied, brutally occupied. So, and this is a really important point here, the destruction of an ethnic, national, racial, religious groups. We see many elements of this in the 20th century through today. And I would argue right now. So I think I showed you these pictures, didn't I? This whole. All right, so let's get to the U.S. during the war. Oh, does everyone have this out? Please have this out with the killing fields. Just have it out. Just have it on your desk. I'm just going to give you a little credit for doing it. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. I just want you to watch it. If you miss it, because I think it's that good. I'm not just doing it because you have to do it. I made a rule, but it's great. I love the interview. So the United States maintained neutrality like it did during the Anglo-French War, like it did during the Napoleonic Wars. Neutrality. But U.S. got rich. I love this one. We believe in peace, no war, but we will fill orders very quickly. So you can imagine what's going to happen with demand from Europe. Prices for goods in the United States are going to go up. This is going to be the highest crop prices in the world. Highest crop prices in America, I'm sorry, of all time during World War I because of demand from Europe. But because of the Allied blockade, by the middle of 1915, the United States was basically only trading with the Allies. So you can imagine the German point of view. The United States is kind of allied with the Allies because you're only trading with them. That was part of their justification to sink ships that would lead to the Lusitania. And so the economy is booming. The United States is staying out of the war. And there's a lot of propaganda about the various dogs for the various countries. That was used a lot. You know, the American Bull Terrier, the French Bulldog, the Russian Wolfhound, the German Dachshund, the English Bulldog. It's amazing how many dog posters from around the world there would be on all sides. But the United States was still involved. What's the name of Teddy Roosevelt's diplomacy of economic imperialism? Yes, big stick. The U.S. is still basically doing it. Now this got a little bit crunched up, so right down the Mexican Revolution. There was a civil war in Mexico during this time, and the U.S. intervened. I'm sorry that the font got a little blended in. You're so talented. You can do it. Like I've said, this might be the last class I ever teach. And it's no class will ever match this class, right? Do you agree with that? And I would never say that to another class. Ever. Especially not. So the United States intervened in the Civil War. Remember, the United States has been intervening all over. And Mexico, as they say, that's definitely in our area of interest in the northern hemisphere. Or I'm sorry, the western hemisphere. The United States even attacked Veracruz, which is the harbor city for Mexico City, shelled it and occupied it as an issue with some American soldiers who were there were attacked, but an issue with banks and getting loans back. Remember, this is economic imperialism. But in 1916, Pancho Villa, and it goes into 1917, twice, this is one from Columbus, New Mexico, crossed the border and robbed 2 banks in the United States. Pancho Villa was a revolutionary against the Carranza government, the dictatorship in Mexico City. He wanted to get money to help his revolution. He thought the United States was helping the dictatorship anyways. But the United States would intervene. They literally invaded with over 2,000 cavalry under John Pershing and tramped around northern Mexico fruitlessly trying to chase down Pancho Villa and his forces. Pancho Villa was a revolutionary. And Pancho Villa very, very adeptly avoided them. There were a couple fights, but the U.S. essentially invaded. In fact, when the United States declared war on Germany, it still had 2,000 cavalrymen inside of Mexico. So Mexico's involved in the Civil War. So essentially they're armies, but they're kind of under the control of the small central government and warlords. It would have finally end with kind of a republic, fairly repressive. So while this is going on, the United States had an election. Wilson's running for re-election. The Republican was Charles Evans Hughes of Massachusetts. And Wilson, the progressive, had a number of reforms, but also this booming economy. Here's Hughes. But right here was Wilson's slogan. You can also see it, really pushing peace. But he kept us out of the war. That was his slogan. He kept us out of the war. So he is actually promising to go to Europe after he's elected and broker a peace agreement. That went nowhere. But Wilson's big thing, we're out of the war, peace. And he would win re-election. So he'd be the first Democrat to win re-election, to win 2 terms in a row since Andrew Jackson. So Wilson is in office. So remember, the president's elected in November. Back then, the inauguration wasn't until March. He's going to be inaugurated March 3rd, 1917. Literally less than a month, one day less than a month after his inauguration, the United States is at war. So everything changed in those few months before he was inaugurated. And the change was in Germany. Germany decided to start unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917. Germany decided to go all out. Now here's the deal. Back in 1915, they started it, unrestricted submarine warfare, to blockade Britain. Some to Lusitania pulled back because it angered the United States. 1916, similar thing happened. So they pulled back. But in 1917, the German army, and therefore the country, was under new leadership. And they rolled the die. One more time. The new leader of the German army in 1917 was Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. And remember Ludendorff, his chief of staff, the man who invented the term total war. Hindenburg, the Kaiser, Ludendorff. And they decided to unleash the U-boats on Britain, blockade them and starve them out. What they thought is if they unleashed all these new U-boats, so they spent all these resources making U-boats. Here's propaganda of U-boats surrounding Great Britain. Surround it, starve them out, Britain will have no choice but to go to the peace table. And they made it clear, well, we're going to sink any ship we see going into Britain. And that includes, obviously, U.S.-owned merchant ships and passenger ships, like the Lusitania. They figure they can knock Britain out before the United States can do anything. The U.S. has a tiny, tiny army, powerful navy, but not enough to make a huge difference compared to Britain's. And so, rolling the die. Looking back at this was a horrible mistake. Sinking without warning would infuriate the United States and really play on that idea of German brutality. So, here is the area that they said any ships coming in here will be sunk. But the submarines didn't have the range, so it's basically they planted here, and they would spread the submarines out and just look. Hope a ship would come by and then sink it. Do you ever get that image? It was just kind of spread out, just hoping ships come by. And there, there are thousands of merchant ships coming through. So hopefully a random chance, basically one will come by. They can't be too near the coast because they got to the surface all the time. Almost immediately, the United States was furious. Here they broke off diplomatic relations, as you can see this. So that's Wilson's nearing inauguration. And as U.S. ships get sunk, American anger is going to get bigger and bigger. Here, this is one of the classic ones. U.S. patience is sunk, and see the periscope? And the U.S. is going to use this as one of the justifications. Well, use this as the major justification for war. Help stop this, sailor, see what happened to her. So applying a Red Cross nurse, and I love another one, culture. They really hammered Germany. You think you have culture? That's German culture. You're the Hun. And Germany would have been better off if they would have used their U-boats to surface, stop the ships, allowed the crew to get on lifeboats, and then scuttle it, sink it. That would have caused significantly less anger, and as it would turn out, probably stop almost as many ships. But this infuriated the United States. And then the British presented the United States with something else, the Zimmermann Note. So Zimmermann was the British or the German foreign minister. And Ludendorff went to Zimmermann and said, figure out a way to distract the United States if they enter the war. Figure out a way. Now Zimmermann thought he came up with a brilliant plan. Mexico has got to be mad at the United States. So Zimmermann's the German foreign minister. That's the G4Men, German foreign minister. I try to pack it in one line. He sent a telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico. So he sent a telegram. Now the telegram is going to go on transcontinental telegraph lines. So the transcontinental telegraph lines cross the Channel to England, and then go across to Washington, D.C., and then go down that way. They knew Britain has tapped into the telegraph line. But Germans thought their code could never be broke. This is the telegraph. See all the numbers? That's the code. Germany thought their code could never be broken. So they sent this really provocative code, knowing it could be broken in Britain and it could be broken in the United States. It is kind of interesting they kept the telegraph line open through London to the United States from Germany, but they did. Well, the plan was they tried to get the German, so backtrack. Let's say the United States entered the war. The plan was to convince Mexico to immediately attack the United States. If the United States enters the war in Europe, Mexico to attack the United States. Now, this is crazy. Mexico doesn't have a real army, and they're in the middle of a civil war, and they couldn't keep out 2,000 cavalrymen from northern Mexico. They can't attack the United States. It's patently ridiculous. But it shows the hubris and the incompetence of Zimmerman, also Hindenburg, or not so much Hindenburg, Ludendorff. And then, after Germany wins World War I, Mexico will get the Mexican cession back. Remember the Mexican cession? That'd be California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and a big hunk of Wyoming. Oh, and Utah. Forgot Utah. Huge amount of land. Now, this is all a pipe dream. It's crazy. And here's the cartoon. The Kaiser, he knows him as a devil, offering Mexico money for this. They throw Texas in that, even though Texas wasn't part of the Mexican cession. But they do it for the map. Well, you know that German code that can never be broken? Yeah, the British had broken it in 1914. So the British broke the German code back about 3 years earlier. And this had been crucial for the victory of Britain and the Allies in World War I. Crucial. They broke the code. They would change it so there'd be windows where they didn't know. This is what Britain did. So Britain got this message before they started unrestricted submarine warfare in February. Britain had this message. They didn't turn it over to the United States, even though the United States would be furious. The U.S. sees this as our hemisphere, the West. They held it, and they waited for some U.S. ships to get sunk. They waited for Americans to die on the high sea. They let the Americans get madder and madder. And then they handed them a telegram and said, look what else the Germans did. Isn't that clever? And so, with that, Wilson could hold out no longer. Wilson did not want war. Yet, he finally, reluctantly, felt he was forced into asking for war. But then once Wilson did it, he's all in. He's all in. That's such a big commitment. It's like one of those, I can't go back now. I gotta win. We'll see a similar thing in Vietnam with Lyndon Johnson. Didn't want to do it. And once he went, he's all in. So, the two big reasons, the U-boats and the Zimmerman belt. Those are the biggest reasons. The U-boats, the biggest. That is the biggest reason. Sinking American merchant ships, but also Zimmerman. So here, Congress declaring war, and you can see sinking ships without warning right there, that cartoon in April 1917. So that's less than a month after he was inaugurated. I should add, though, Wilson was an idealist, and he really wanted the war to be more about U.S. merchant ships and commerce being stopped, so not as much money is being made by companies, or American economic empire in Western Hemisphere. So Wilson wanted a more noble, moral reason for a declaration of war. So also in this declaration of war, he laid out a couple other reasons, and then a few reasons behind the scenes. So let's look at the other reasons for the declaration of war. I should add, see that poster on your left? That's the most famous soldier in British history up to that time, Lord Kitchener. So in 1914, He was the chief of the Imperial British General Staff, and it's shown Kitchener and that famous mustache for once used. So when the U.S. entered the war, that was blatantly copied, but now we don't have a famous general like that, who's alive especially, so they used Uncle Sam. So all of you have probably seen this one. It's a copy of this one, but that's when Lady Columbia, which I showed in a number of cartoons, would begin to diminish as a character for the United States because of the popularity of that cartoon. So back to the declaration of war. It's got to be bigger in commerce. It's got to be bigger in empire. So here's the most noble reason: to make the world safe for democracy, to allow the people of Europe to decide their own fate. And that includes people in these empires like, and the one they emphasize, Poland, but other places too, have their own country and decide their own fate. But there might be a couple problems with this you might see right away. The United States isn't really a democracy. Half of the states still do not allow women to vote, and most African Americans couldn't vote. Most American Indians could not vote. Doesn't sound like a full democracy here, so we're going to make it safe for democracy. That means the U.S. too. And what about the colonies? You think Britain's going to say, oh, you're right, we're going to allow all the colonies like India to decide their own fate? There's issues here. Next, the Russian Revolution in March Revolution in Russia. This revolution overthrew the Tsar and put in a republic. With the republic in place, now we can say we're not fighting for an autocratic, authoritarian king. We're fighting for a democratic republic. It might not seem as important as the other issues, but boy, Wilson really made a big deal about this. We're not helping an evil emperor like the Tsar. We're helping an embryonic Russian republic. Next, of course, German tyranny. So German tyranny, for example, not allowing people to decide their own fate, but especially Belgium. Belgium, that implies all the areas Germany conquered, but everybody focused on Belgium. We've talked about that many times. What effective propaganda. And a couple more reasons that might be a little bit under. Britain was the richest country in the world, at least by the amount of gold they had when the war began. By 1916, they had spent almost all of it, giving it to France or other countries to keep them in the war. And banks, beginning especially in 1916, have been loaning Britain money. Remember, bonds, that's how countries borrow money. When the Tsar started going bad, the British Treasury, the Chancellor of the Exchequer it's called, sent people to Wall Street to sell millions of pounds of bonds to borrow money from U.S. investment banks. Did everyone catch that? So don't just write down bonds. You have to make sure you get that from Britain. Britain owed this money. And then Britain would take this money now, borrow from American banks, big corporate banks, and they'd give it to France, because France was broke. How are these banks going to get their money back? What has to happen for these banks to get their money back? What's that? Britain has to win. The war has to end. Britain has to win. Did everyone catch that? There began a drumbeat in the last 3 months of 1916, especially after the election, for Wilson to intervene in this war so Britain could win, to get money back for the banks. And it grew stronger and stronger and stronger. And so underlying everything. Now, this is really an important reason. Now, Wilson might not have been thinking this because he didn't want to think it, but it was a reason. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, Americans remembered this. And that's part of the reason the Americans tried to stay neutral in World War II despite Nazi tyranny. Because we don't want to get another war for banks. And then the volume of trade the United States was doing. The assumption was there'd even be more trade if we entered the war. We'd be trading more to Britain, more to France, and companies would be making more money. And this would affect all parts of the United States. I'm bragging now. I grew up in Miles City, Eastern Montana. That was one of the most important railheads for the sale of horses in the United States. And who went through horses? Can you imagine who went through horses by the hundreds of thousands every year? The Allies needed so many horses, and so many horses died. So Miles City, that's a little town in Montana, boomed. Well, little town, then it was about 5,000. For Montana, I guess that's not that little. When I was your age, Miles City was about a little over 10,000. Now it's about 8,500, like all the little towns shrinking. So, those are the reasons, but the two most important, everyone got it? Unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmerman Note. So the United States entered the war. I should add, the Germans in World War II thought, okay, we got it now. Our code is unbreakable. No way will anybody figure out our code. We have a machine that scrambles things called the Enigma. They'll never figure out our code. Guess who broke their code? The British broke their code again. And that would be decisive for the Allied victory. The U.S. broke the Japanese code, and that would be decisive in the Pacific. If you're really good at math, they could get into code breaking. Okay, so next, as you can see from this wonderful class, as the children are anticipating something, I would argue, great. Look how happy they are. Don't they look happy? Wait. She knows something. She knows something's up.
Behind her doesn't have a thought in her head. There are no thoughts.
No, she's just hoping nobody notices her. Maybe I can hide. This can only mean one thing. What does it mean? That's right, a thesis. Assess the validity. So you can agree with it or disagree. But if you disagree, you got to say, despite what you disagree with, then 2 more points. Or if you agree, because of A, B, C. And remember, the Y ties the A, B, and C together. If you can find something very specific to use, that's fine. If not, use something economic, political, diplomatic specifically. If not, use economic, political, diplomatic, something like that for your Y. You have 30 seconds. Go. No, you have a little bit longer than that. Write it on your own. As you do that, I'm just going to check to make sure you have your killing field stuff. I'm not going to. There's lots of good reasons, but think about, if you're writing a paragraph, which ones can we talk the most about? That's when you need the most information. Okay, when you're done, Make sure you get the main theme of the I guess that statement. Take a position on it. That'd be basically your why. Economic political and something like that. And then an A, B, and a C. And make sure you have that material. No, this is not what the DBQ is about, even though it'll be a good essay. This is the question about, must be 8 years ago we had this question. Okay, when everyone should be done. I like doing this. Go and pick, go to one of your neighbors, read your thesis, you'll have them go through it, see if you can see all the points of it. So pick across, pick behind. You might have to go in a little group of 3. Pick a neighbor, read. I know someone's just finishing, so you might have to go into a group of 3.
How about you?
Is everyone read to somebody else's? Are you done? I'll give you another couple seconds and then let's. Did anyone read a thesis statement that arguably changed their life? No. Do you have a little jump in your step now after reading that thesis? Is the sun brighter, the day clearer? After reading your own thesis. I read that and I was like, wow, I wrote that? It's like someone else entered my body. You were possessed. Okay. So I hope this was the DBQ about 8 years ago. I can't remember the exact date, but this would be a pretty good one to have for an essay question. If you're going to have an essay question, this would be a good one. So you won't get it. Who knows what you'll get. They haven't asked a question on World War I for a very long time. But, you know, they skip whole big things on the test, so we just got to be ready for whatever we get. So, who would like to read their thesis? No, let me phrase it. Who would like to volunteer someone to read their thesis? Thank you, Mason, for stepping up to the plate.
I was going to volunteer this. Despite Wilson's claim that the U.S. entered the war to, quote, make the world safe for democracy, the U.S. actually entered the war due to economic pressures, as it wanted to protect British bonds owned by banks that wanted to boost trade between the U.S. and the Allies.
Good. So you have despite that, so you have that first part, so you have the counterpoint, you explain that, talk about those reasons, and then the other thing, you have a why, which is economic reasons, that would tie it all together. Good thesis statement. You might have another one they would like to read. Any other volunteers? No one wants to volunteer? Thank you for volunteering.
Despite the U.S. wanting to get their bonds paid back from Britain, they did enter the war to make the world safe for democracy because of German tyranny and Russia.
Very good. In German tyranny, you might have something like in Belgium or something a little more definite. Good. Good. And so you address the main point, you get back to it. Have a why. Good. One more. Who wants to read one more? Or should I just pick on somebody else? Does anybody want to volunteer? Come on, people. Once again, I always enjoy this when I call people. Some stare right at me, hoping that, and then some look down. Maybe they won't see me. Maybe I can hide. But the stare at is always a good one, right? Because that's one like, oh, I'm ready. So I'll try to pick someone else. No one wants to volunteer? Thank you, Dean.
The U.S. did not enter World War I to save democracy. The economic power of the U.S. was on Wilson's mind. Possibly to help trade, open up new countries for trade, and by saying it was to save democracy, to help keep political power.
Good. And I know where you went. You addressed the main points of the question. Good job. And you have a why. You tie together economically. Yes.
Does it matter how you answer this question? Okay.
So I know exactly what you're saying. What if I pick one and it's wrong?
Yeah.
No, there's no wrong as long as you have evidence either way. Now, essays, all these things are subjective. So obviously you might get someone who might disagree, but they're supposed to be objective and not do that. So the best you is just come up with what you believe is best, or a better way to look at it is what you believe is best that you can answer and give evidence. Does that make sense? So as long as you give evidence and back up your argument, it should work for you. And yeah, that would be a great question. And I did mine. Yeah. I bet there's a lot of people. I heard someone like this look pretty basic. And don't forget the first 1, 2. Just very nice, very simple. And one more. I don't know why the font looks bigger and more bold, but it just does. And I put the A, B, and C's just so you can see it. That's almost exactly what Mason had. It's no, you peeked ahead. No, you had a very good thesis. Would this be a good question to get? So we're going to get something on antebellum reform. Who knows? I don't mind. The regular essay I don't mind. It's the DBQ. You get one choice in essay. That's always the hardest one. Whatever you get, you get. So, just have to do it. What's your DBQ going to be on next Tuesday? Ratification now. So let's get to the U-boat offensive. The U-boat offensive almost worked. Those red dots are ships that were sunk during the year of the U-boat offensive. And it really began, they would have to ration food, ration or ration, both words are okay. I say them both without even realize I'm doing it. And it really hurt Britain. But Britain spent the whole war avoiding doing the one measure that stopped the U-boat offensive in its tracks. Convoys. Instead of having ships go separately, they thought they could slip past the U-boats. They began to go convoys of 30 to 50 ships. So here's a convoy right here. Here's a schematic of it, defended by Royal Navy or U.S. naval vessels. And this worked. It limited the chances for U-boats who were just lurking in the middle of the ocean to catch submarines. So instead of 50 different chances, it's one chance to catch a convoy or not. And yeah, they were worried that if they had all 50 together, one U-boat could sink like 5 ships. But the ocean, I don't know if you know this, it's really big. So if you're on the high seas, the chance of one ship slipping by is about the same as 50 ships, because the ocean is that big. Have you ever been on the high seas, been on the ocean outside of the side of land, or on a plane over the ocean outside the side of land? It's kind of shocking how big it is. It's bigger than Canyon Ferry, the Atlantic. Yeah, I know. Did I just blow your mind? Yeah, some of you are kind of reeling in shock.
How many dreadlocks do you think?
Oh, God.
We've got 2 on Katy Perry already.
I got 2, yeah, 2, so 6. So, back to Russia. We got to talk very quickly about Russia. Because Russia, what's going to happen to Russia will be intertwined with the U.S. entering the war. So just a little bit of review. Remember I mentioned this before, in 1916, the Russians tried a big offensive to coincide with the Somme right here called the Brusilov offensive. They gained a little territory but lost 1 million men in 1 month. Killed, wounded, or missing. And 1916 was a terrible agricultural year in Russia. There were huge food shortages and basically near famine situations in the big cities of Russia like Petrograd. There were food riots all over. And many Russian noblemen who were living high on the hog because of the Tsar were worried the Tsar might be overthrown. And they decided the only way to reinforce the Tsar, who basically fled Petrograd and went to the front, was to get rid of Rasputin. Here he is with many of his admirers. They get rid of Rasputin. Now, I hemmed and hawed over this, but I really should tell you the story of Rasputin, right?
Yes.
So Rasputin, in November of 1916, oh, look at this cartoon. This shows what a lot of people were thinking. Rasputin was really responsible for the Tsar's policies, and the hand there implies something else with the Tsarina, doesn't it? So they're implying things. So the assassination of Rasputin would be done by a number of noblemen, most importantly Felix Yusupov, because he would write the definitive story about it. Now, we're not sure if he was telling the whole truth on it, but who cares? It's a great story. Rasputin was assassinated. So the plan was that they knew Rasputin liked a certain kind of sweets, a certain kind of tart that's going to be laced with cyanide. He liked sweetened wine called mead laced with cyanide, and brandy laced with cyanide. They said they put enough cyanide to kill 30 men. And the plan was to invite him over for these treats, and a nobleman's wife wanted to meet him. So they know he'd be coming then. And they had him over, and he was immediately distrustful. Why is there only 3 guys here? This is not the party you promised. And where is she? Oh, she's coming, don't worry. Here, have these tarts. We're not going to have them, but you are. And he was suspicious, but hungry. Supposedly, finally ate one, drank. He drank more than anybody ever drank, it appears like. And so he drank a few glasses of wine and many glasses of brandy. She started pouring it down. And they said, oh, he's dead. He's taken enough cyanide. There's no way he can survive. He still just started kind of slurring his words and not talking. And finally passed out. And so what they did is, Yusupov put his jacket on, or put his coat on, his long coat, and went to Rasputin's house to act like Rasputin and went back home, got the coat off, hid, so they could have deniability. And then they went back to the home where Rasputin was passed out in the room. He wasn't there. They went around the corner and he lurched out at him and came at him after all this cyanide. They shot him twice with a revolver and beat him with a poker from the fireplace. Beat him senseless. And they're like, oh God, he's finally dead. And they begin to carry him out. And all of a sudden he woke up, threw him off, and lurched outside of the door running away. Now that's with a bullet in him, beaten, and maybe 2 or 3 gallons of cyanide. They finally shot him in the head, beat him more, and finally collapsed. Oh God, he's finally dead. Well, they didn't really have a plan to do what to do with the body. So they took him to the half-frozen Neva River, to a little bridge over the river, found a hole in the ice, threw him into the hole in the ice. They found the body the next morning. And supposedly, there was water on the lungs, and his fingernails were gone. He was scratching on the ice to get out and drowned.
He's like impossible to kill. That's like impressive.
Now, they cut off various body parts of Rasputin and they're very disgustingly in jars all over Petrograd in various museums. And Rasputin finally died. Now, they very well could have shot him and he just died. But that story's much better, isn't it? The story of Rasputin, which implies he might come back for his missing parts. But that is Rasputin's body on the autopsy table. Look how badly he was beaten. He was shot upside the head. So, it didn't save the Tsar. February 1917, there was a revolution. Now, the February Revolution, they're on a different calendar. They're on the old Julian calendar without a leap year. So they were behind. So the February Revolution actually happened in March. Just go with it. So the Bolshevik Revolution, the October Revolution, happened in November. Old calendar. So there were food riots all over Petrograd. The Tsar ordered the troops to put down the riots. No. The army said no. We're not going to do it. And the Tsar realized he's done. The Tsar abdicated and they created a republic. Now, the leader of this republic, it's a provisionary republic. They had a provisionary Duma or parliament. Alexander Kerensky would be the leading member of the new cabinet, eventually prime minister. Here's Kerensky right here. Kerensky was a socialist who wanted out of the war. But after defeat, he, when asked about the war, he pushed the new government to stay in the war. We need a victory before we can sue for peace with Germany. Did everyone catch that? So the people who overthrew the Tsar wanted out of this horrible war. But Kerensky, put in power to end the war, pushed the new cabinet to stay in the war. So now the United States can say we're fighting for a republic, and they stayed in the war. Does anybody want to guess as you leave how well they did in 1917?
It went so well.
If you're going to be gone, I have something to give you. What this is, it's a DBQ and samples of good, average, and bad DBQs. So it's just something for you to look at. So everyone's going to be gone on Thursday. Please grab this on your way out. Sound good? And I'm going to hand them out to everybody else tomorrow. But if you're going to be gone on Thursday, get one. It's just for yourself to look at. It's got samples. It's got explanation. I took it from someplace else, but you know what the heck, right? Have a good day, everybody. What rodeo? Wild West. The Wild West. Yeah.
My dad and uncle, they quite a few years back in the Wild City rodeo, they did wild cow milking.
Oh, really?
That one is so much fun.
Was it doing the Buccaneer sale?
No. It was, I don't remember.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
We haven't been back since, but it was so funny because they got like a tiny little kid because they couldn't get their cow.
Yeah, what the heck, right?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Everyone else is called all the time.
On Friday.
That's
and,
insane.
doing this blood drive.
Yeah.
And
What
my
about the
appointment's
death?
like 10:30.
Just remind me.
Okay.
And you can go like a few minutes early, go back.
Because I have to get my iron levels, before I can actually.
Yeah, so when you have to go, you go. Okay?
Alright.
Yeah, and just but remind me. That's why.
It's like a line of people coming out the door this time is concerning. Like,
Ah.
right to the minute.
Huh?
Going right past the.
I kind of do. You tried to hit me?
Maybe.
You skipped 2 days. No.
I also did a bunch of other students, so that's one of them.
But I'm glad you're back. That espionage I can do. I have to get off the camera. The espionage act. I tried it last week.
I don't remember what that is. Hold on.